So we've talked a little bit about how police are trying to create these pro-social engagements with people, how they are trying to set a groundwork in order to make themselves more approachable, more desirable, maybe more willing to have people investigate, participate, interact, and take ownership of their community and working with police, right? So from an organizational standpoint, how does this end up happening? So the goal, recall, right, is to have these pro-social engagements between the police and the public, especially in local geographies, and ideally with the same officers or same group of officers, so there's the familiarity. And so what they want to do, because there's very much a pressure for individuals to take ownership of crime in the community in their local area, right, is that there's also this drive to empower local police, empower these local officers. So put them in a position where they can make decisions, where they can interact with others, where they can advise and consult based on these problems. And so what ends up happening is that they want more freedom in their decision-making power to call upon officers or to marshal other resources. So we want to have more freedom in this area, right? Where so maybe the local officer isn't necessarily speaking to their sergeant or central command about what to do, but they get access to resources that are needed. So at the same time, right, there's also this encouragement then that if we are empowering local officers, so people who are working in specific geographies, then is to lessen the verticality of a department. So they don't have to report as much, they don't have to go up the chain as much. So if we lessen the verticality, by extension then, local smaller people are equipped to handle problems. So it's very much looking for a flattened, decentralized look, and really trying to encourage officers to work with their community and get other resources to benefit, right? So what does this actually tells us, right? So there are a few things that we should probably know from a research-oriented issue that we should be aware of, right? So we'll talk more about research problems. So first one that we already kind of hinted at, right, is that, and that is true of any police department, right, is that it's very hard to get a lot of officers or departments to participate. So when this ends up happening, right, when you have a lack of that that's going on, right, it becomes really difficult to have a control group. Look at this. So there's oftentimes a lack of a control group. So we can't really compare, what worked in one department versus another and how they changed it, right? So because of that, because there's lack of control group, right, the design is inherently flawed. The second one to also keep in mind, right, is that defining and doing community policing are two very different things. They could very easily, just because you adopt a philosophy doesn't mean you have a program in place to actually perform it, right? So if you don't have, a program in place to set it, but you have, you've adopted as your mission statement, it's not really like a different thing or different place comes in place. So it becomes an issue about like, what is like the actual treatment. So there's poor treatment definition. And related to that, right, is that if you have officers who maybe don't necessarily want to employ a service kind of background, they don't want to be working as, maybe they, it's much more exciting to be reactive and to chase down bad guys and, to like hold people accountable for the law, that might actually be more why people got into it. So if you are now being more proactive, you're trying to reduce the amount of crime that you actually do. The job is not as thrilling. So as a result, then, the officers in place may not implement the issue, may not implement, community policing principles. Another thing that we should probably think about as well are selection effects. So the first one that we should be aware of, right, is that, the police departments, one, who participate in research, and two, adopt community policing are going to be very different from the ones who choose not to participate in a study or do not put in community policing, right? We really can't randomly assign who is going to do community policing versus who is not. We can't force, new retraining. We can't, require anyone to do this from a research standpoint. So the officers that are more willing to pursue these are maybe more likely to see the outcomes that we desire. So there's sort of like a false inflation effect that can happen as well. The other part to consider too is that there are issues with citizen participation. So the people who are most likely going to participate in this, right, are going to be different from the ones who do not, right? And as someone once told me, the world tends to get run by people who show up, right? So people who take the time and effort to make it to an appointment, who want to participate in the actual process, all of them, excuse me, are more likely to have their words said, right, or their actions taken seriously because they took the time to show up. And so those problems become prioritized over anything else because they're the ones that are registered and logged. If no one's there, though, right, do the people who show up and participate and try to get involved, are they, indicative of the views of the greater community? Arguably, no, especially if the goal is to increase community policing and to be more excessive, and to build up, maybe some goodwill, create the service-oriented aspect. You can imagine that in communities that have a historically poor relationship with police, that are maybe openly hostile, right? They're probably going to be less comfortable expressing those needs to officers or really expecting things to change. So, they may not see the impact that we need. So, any kind of effect then in terms of reducing fear of crime, in terms of improving relationships, may not do anything for that segment of the population. So, it's harder to say whether or not, this is actually, going to work, right? The other part that comes in as well is that, police departments don't really do a good job of evaluation, but, there's also a lack of theory behind the measurement or the program that governs policing. So we, are more likely to say, for example, that if we don't have a good definition of what we're actually doing, it's not implemented well, then we probably, tend to think it poorly. We don't know exactly what we're measuring, so it's hard to disentangle. And so that's really what we're trying to get at here, especially since we consider community policing can be, a lot of different things, right? This is, the meetings themselves. Maybe this is cleaning up trash. depending on, what it is, right? Some people would say, if we are just like, putting cops on bikes, right? We're having that more like, oh, I see, cops in bike shorts now, so now I can approach them, right? Like maybe not, I don't know. If we have these situations where, or who knows, or if it's just like, we adopted a mission statement at a department level, is that sufficient for observing this effect? And I would say, it really depends, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that's true, or if it's just really about being more responsive and, having calls for service, work or not, right? So all these are research-related problems to community policing that really cast a lot of doubt on the available knowledge of it, and something that all of you should be aware of at the same time, right? So that if you whatever you chose to write about, know that these are issues related to community policing, its study, and any kind of impacts that we try to draw from that. So in general, though, what knowing these limitations ahead of time, what do you think about from a research perspective? So recall the first one, right, that we're often always concerned about is going to be crime itself, right? Police are often, this is like the first thing we usually judge police on, is their ability to reduce crime, right? And keep in mind, right, is that we try to lower crime, right? That is the goal. So does community policing reduce crime, right? Well, while in some aspects we attempt to do that, right, by having this crime prevention aspect, right, it's not uncommon to see in some cases there is an increase in crime. Why might that be the case, right? Is there something perhaps about having a open, communication with police departments that leads to more crime in the community because we hate like accessible police officers? Perhaps. I don't know what that possibly would be, but there could be, a different path here. One. Recall, though, that community policing is trying to increase trust and to have people believe that their faith in the criminal justice system is supposed to increase, supposed to feel comfortable approaching police officers. So what that happens, though, is before, if you think about like when a crime occurs, right, there's a decision, where you're trying to figure out, did a crime occur, and then the decision to actually call police. And the way that police are often judged, or like, the metric is with the QCR crimes, right, which are by definition 8 crimes that are known to police. If you're creating a situation where police, are now seen as, allies or something like that, more than they were before, you have more trust in them doing it, they're encouraging you to report crimes so you can be an ally. So if you have a better, like, relationship, right, then you are probably going to have more crime occurring, right, because more crime is being reported to police, right, because there's an established trust in place. So depending on what it is, right, unless there's a more specific crime prevention strategy going on, it's not uncommon to see this. So we have crime occurs, crime reported, and as a result, crime has this appearance of increasing, right? This, again, goes back to like dark figure of crime kind of stuff, which hopefully is familiar. Second thing to think about is that when we think about fear of crime, right? So are they more fearful of it to begin with? So again, with the goal of community policing is to have more faith and trust in police departments. So what we end up finding, though, is that more often than not, right, we see that there is a reduction in fear, that people tend to fear less than they used to. They're more likely to call on police to adopt these kinds of programs. And because of that, they are, they feel better about police, right? So this is seen as a positive impact, right? So those are probably usually like the 2 chief outcomes that people look towards, right? But, there are also issues about, officer acceptance and morale. there are some officers that, don't really maybe care for this. It doesn't feel like real police work. This isn't seen as like why they got into the field. So, sometimes officers, feel poorly about it. But, usually more often than not, we're focused on crime and fear of crime. And it's typically shown that, the question of crime is debatable depending on, the pathway, but fear of crime, tends to go down. So with that, I think that covers most of the issues related to this. Hopefully useful. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next series video. So